Hello and welcome to British English with Alexandre. Wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we're moving on with another unit of our English journey. Today we're talking about Unity 32 out of expected 100 units. Today we're talking about people's words and thoughts, basically about reporting people's words and thoughts. So, just so you know, before we get started, please, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Share it with your friends, your family members, people all over the world trying to improve their English. Okay, let's get started. This is section A of our unit. We're talking about quoting. Quoting is just like that. Quote. Something like this. We're quoting and reporting in our own words. Okay, moving on. When we report what people think or what they have said, we often give the information using our own words. We do this with the sentences that have a reporting clause and a reported clause. For example, we've got here the reporting clause and the reported clause. For example, she explained that she couldn't take the job until January. She explained what? That she couldn't take the job until January. Notice that this particle, this demonstrative pronoun that can be omitted. For example, we might say she explained she couldn't take the job until January. So we've got the reporting clause and the reported clause. The sentence that has been said by someone else. Another example, he didn't tell me where to put the boxes. He didn't tell you what? He didn't tell me where to put the boxes. Okay, moving on to section B. If the exact words are important, we might report the actual words someone said. In writing, this is done in a quotation. For example, I suppose you've heard the latest news, she said to me. She said to you what? I suppose you've heard the latest news. I suppose you've heard the latest news, she said to me. Moving on to the second example. Of course, Carter replied. You have to pay him to do the job. You have what? You have to pay him to do the job. Of course, Carter replied. You have to pay him to do the job. The reporting clause can come before, within, or at the end of the quotation. In the English used in stories and novels, the reporting verb, ed, ask, count, ask, and continue, is often placed before the subject when the reporting clause comes after the quotation, except when the subject is a pronoun. For example, when will you be back? Asked Jimin. Or when will you be back? Jimin asked. Moving on. And after that, I moved to Italy, she continued. And after that, I moved to Italy, she continued. In that case, we can't say continued she. We usually say she continued because it's a pronoun, differently from the previous example where we've got the option of when will you be back? Asked Jimin, or when will you be back? Jimmy asked. So in that case we can use it before the person or after it, or the subject properly. Okay, now moving on to section C, we're talking about negatives in reporting. For example, to report what somebody didn't say or think, we make the reporting verb negative. For example, he didn't tell me how he'd get to London. He didn't tell me how he would get to London. Or he didn't tell me how he'd get to London. Didn't tell you what? How he'd get to London, or how he would get to London. If we want to report a negative sentence, then we usually report these in the reported clause. For example, you're right. It isn't a good idea. It isn't a good idea. He agreed that it wasn't a good idea. This is the reported clause. He agreed. He agreed what? That it wasn't a good idea. Although it may be reported in the reporting clause, depending on meaning. For example, I disagree. It's not a good idea at all. I disagree. It's not a good idea at all. In the reporting clause, he didn't agree that it was a good idea. He didn't agree that it was a good idea. However, with some verbs, to report a negative sentence, we usually make the verb in the reporting clause negative. For example, I expect he won't come. I expect he won't come. Or I expect he will not come. He won't come. I don't expect he will come. She didn't expect him to come. We also use those patterns with the verbs to believe, feel, intend, plan, propose, suppose, think, and want. Now moving on. This is the section D. We're talking about reporting questions. To report a W8 question, we use a reporting clause and a clause with a W8 word. For example, she asked me what the problem was. She asked you what the problem was. She asked me what the problem was. And another example, I asked him where to go next. You asked him what? Where to go next. I asked him where to go next. When we report a yes/no question, we use a reporting clause followed by a clause beginning with either if or whether, but note that we can't use if plus to infinitive. For example, Liz wanted to know if we had any photos of our holiday, or Liz wanted to know whether we had any photos of our holiday. The usual word order in a W8 if or whether clause is the one we would use in a statement. For example, have you seen Paul recently? She wanted to know if I had seen Paul recently. She wanted to know if I had seen Paul recently. However, if the original question begins what, which, or who, followed by be plus complement, we can put the complement before or after be in the report. For example, who was the winner? Asked who the winner was, or asked who was the winner. Asked who the winner was, or I asked who was the winner. Now that we don't use a form of do in the W8 if or whether clause. She asked me where I found it. She asked me where I found it. She asked what? She asked me where I found it. However, if we are reporting a negative question, we can use a negative form of do. For example, he asked me why I didn't want anything to eat. He asked He asked why I didn't want anything to eat. Okay, we've just finished that unit. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's quite simple to understand. We're talking about reporting. It's all about reported speech. Reporting clause, reported clause. We're basically repeating what someone has said to anyone. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. Please, I'd like to remember you. Subscribe to the channel, enjoy the content, share the unit, that lesson with all of your friends, English learners all over the world, so we can keep up with the work, helping English learners to improve their efficiency in terms of reaching fluency, in terms of developing vocabulary, learning grammar structures, things to bring your English to the next level. I hope you've enjoyed it. Cheers.